The galaxy had a very specific idea of what constituted hell, and Ryan Mitchell was about to prove them embarrassingly wrong. The recruitment station on Ceres Station reeked of recycled air and desperation. Mitchell slouched in a chair that squeaked every time he breathed, thumbing through a datapad that asked questions like, rate your tolerance for extreme environmental stress, and describe your most challenging survival situation. He'd written, got lost in Yellowstone for 3 days, made friends with an elk. He was reasonably sure that these weren't the answers they wanted to hear. Next, the voice crackled through a speaker embedded in reinforced plexiglass. Mitchell shuffled forward, sliding his forms through the slot. A drachma clerk, all purple scales and professional exhaustion, scanned his file with compound eyes that suggested she'd seen this exact disappointment 1,000 times before. You're applying for the Coalition Exchange Initiative. Her translation device rendered her skepticism in perfect English. You understand this involves training on a designated hazard class world. The posting mentioned travel and unique challenges. Mitchell leaned against the counter. I've been stuck on orbital defense for 2 years. How bad can it be? The clerk's scales rippled in what he'd learned was the drachma equivalent of a grimace. She stamped his paperwork with more force than strictly necessary. Transport Bay 12. Departure is 0400 tomorrow. Sign the liability waiver, all of them. How many are there? 17. Mitchell signed them without reading past the first page. Behind him, another hopeful applicant was already being turned away for insufficient psychological fortification scores. 3 months later, Mitchell found himself aboard a vessel that looked like someone had crossbred a cargo hauler with a luxury resort and given up halfway through. The other trainees were nothing like the aliens from Earth's entertainment feeds, no rubber-forehead humans in elaborate makeup. These were genuinely alien, and they moved through the ship with a caution that suggested every surface might be trying to kill them. Commander Dravik stood nearly 8 feet tall, his scales shifting through blues and greens depending on his mood. Currently, they were settling into a worried teal. He wore a uniform with more medals than fabric and carried himself like someone who'd never questioned an order that didn't come from physics itself. Dr. Hellman resembled an otter that had decided walking upright was more efficient than swimming. Her fur was sleek silver, and she spoke through a vocalizer that added harmonics to every word. She'd spent 6 decades studying extreme survival across 20 different planetary environments and had the stress wrinkles to prove it. Captain Throck looked like someone had given a praying mantis access to a gym and military training. His 4 arms moved independently, and his compound eyes could track multiple targets simultaneously. Mitchell wasn't sure how you tested for that. The captain had won the sectoral combat trials 9 consecutive times and treated every conversation like a tactical briefing. Specialist Liss was the strangest of the group. She appeared to be composed of living crystal, her form refracting light in ways that hurt to look at directly. When she moved, she produced sounds like wind chimes made of diamond. Her species, the crystalline accord, were renowned strategists who could calculate probability fields in real time. Then there was Mitchell. 5'10", brown hair that never quite stayed in regulation, a fitness score that technically passed if nobody looked too closely. He'd joined Earth's defense forces because the alternative was student debt, and his recruiter had promised adventure. Technically, this qualified. Tell me, human Mitchell. Dravik's scales shifted to a concerned purple during their first briefing. What survival training has your species provided for this mission? Mitchell scratched his jaw. Standard stuff. Wilderness survival, cold weather operations, desert training. Did a weekend course on edible plants once. Mostly learned which ones make you throw up. The other trainees exchanged glances that transcended species barriers. Dr. Hellman made notes on a datapad, her whiskers twitching. Perhaps you misunderstand our destination's nature. Gehenna 9 is classified as an extreme hazard world. The gravity is 70% higher than your homeworld standard. The atmosphere requires supplemental breathing rigs. The local ecosystem is universally hostile. And that's before we discuss the weather, Liss added, her crystalline voice chiming with what might have been concern. Corrosive precipitation, electromagnetic storms capable of disabling most technology, temperature fluctuations that can fracture military-grade equipment. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. Sounds like camping in the Rockies during spring. Did that on leave once. Snowed in April, flooded in May, and a mountain goat ate my tent. Dravok's scales achieved a color Mitchell hadn't seen before, something between nauseous yellow and existential dread purple. Human Mitchell, I suspect you don't fully comprehend the severity. Gehenna 9 has a casualty rate of 38% for fully equipped Special Forces personnel. That's better odds than I-95 during rush hour. Mitchell brightened. What's the food situation? Because if it's standard military rations, I brought hot sauce. Hot sauce. Dr. Hellman's vocalizer produced a confused trill. Is that a weapon? It's a condiment. Makes everything taste better. The conversation deteriorated from there. Mitchell answered increasingly detailed questions about human dietary habits, temperature tolerances, and threat assessment protocols. Each answer seemed to alarm his fellow trainees rather than reassure them. Let me understand correctly, Liz said, her glow dimming to near invisibility. Your species voluntarily consumes plant matter that causes pain. Peppers, yeah. Some people make a competition out of it. You expose yourselves to lethal temperatures for recreation. Saunas, ice fishing, desert hiking builds character. You cohabitate with predatory species. Dogs are descended from wolves. Cats are basically tiny tigers with better PR. My neighbor had a python that got loose once. Thing was 6 feet long. Dravok's scales cycled through several colors before settling on sickly green. Perhaps we should review the mission parameters again. But Mitchell was already wondering if Gehenna 9 had decent fishing spots and whether zero-gravity coffee tasted different than regular coffee. This was shaping up to be the most interesting deployment he'd ever had. The transport hummed through space, carrying them toward what the galaxy considered the ultimate survival test. Mitchell, completely unaware, he was about to redefine several species' understanding of the word dangerous. The landing shuttle rattled like a paint shaker full of marbles. Through the viewport, Mitchell watched Gehenna 9 grow larger, a swirling mess of angry storms, jagged mountains, and weather systems that looked like they were actively fighting each other. Lightning arced between clouds in colors that didn't exist in Earth's spectrum. Final approach to Base Alpha, the pilot announced. All personnel, engage hazard protocols. Around him, the other trainees went through pre-landing checklists that looked more complicated than launching a shuttle. Dravok sealed himself into an environmental suit with its own life support. Hellman strapped on a breathing rig that covered most of her face. Throck activated an exoskeleton that doubled his already impressive bulk. Liss powered up an energy shield that made the air shimmer like heat haze. Mitchell checked his gear. Standard uniform, boots, backpack with basic supplies. He'd left the heavy equipment in storage, figuring he could grab it later if necessary. Human Mitchell. Dravok's voice crackled through external speakers. Where is your environmental protection? Mitchell patted his pack. Got a jacket if it rains. Weather report said 30% chance of precipitation. The precipitation is sulfuric acid. Oh, Mitchell considered this. Is it concentrated or diluted? Because I worked at a battery plant one summer, and you get used to the smell. The shuttle hit the ground with a thud that rattled everyone's teeth. Through the viewport, Gehenna 9's surface looked like someone had collected every hostile environment from Earth and mixed them with a few things Earth had been lucky to avoid. The gravity hit like a truck the moment the airlock opened. Mitchell's backpack suddenly felt like it was full of bowling balls, but it wasn't unbearable. Heavy, sure. He'd humped heavier loads during training. The air tasted metallic and sharp, like breathing in a thunderstorm, but his lungs adapted after a few breaths. Around him, his fellow trainees were struggling. Dravok's powered suit whined under the increased gravity. Hellman breathed heavily, each step looking like effort. Throck's exoskeleton handled the gravity, but stress fractures were already forming in the joints. Liss's energy shield flickered, and her crystalline form seemed dimmer. Base Alpha looked like a military installation designed by someone expecting planetary siege. Everything was reinforced, sealed, and built to withstand impacts that would level normal structures. Warning signs covered every surface in 12 languages and 5 mathematical systems. Welcome to hell. The base commander, a grizzled drachma named Colonel Stavros, greeted them with a 1,000-yard stare. I've run this installation for 8 months. I've seen things that would make combat medics quit and become poets. He led them through orientation, essentially a very long list of everything that could kill them. The local fauna included carnivorous plants, predators that could phase shift through solid matter, insects the size of cars, and something called a rift hound that could apparently teleport and loved the taste of off-worlders. The weather is equally hostile, Stavros continued. Acid rain twice weekly, electromagnetic storms that fry unshielded tech, temperature swings from -40 to +70 Celsius within hours, and wind patterns that occasionally include superheated plasma tornadoes. Dravok's scales achieved a new color that hurt to look at. Hellman was taking notes so rapidly her datapad was smoking. Throck had stopped moving except for the occasional antenna twitch. Liss had gone nearly invisible. Questions? Stavros asked. Mitchell raised his hand. Is there a cafeteria? And do you have hot sauce? The silence could have been used as a weapon. Stavros stared at him, then checked his datapad. You're the human. That's me. Cafeteria is in Building 7. The food is designed for maximum nutrition, minimum taste. As for hot sauce, he paused, looking thoughtful. Actually, yes. Previous human left behind a bottle called Carolina Reaper with a note saying it might be useful for equipment maintenance. Perfect, Mitchell said cheerfully. When do we start? Start what? The actual training, the fun part. Stavros made a note that looked increasingly medical in nature. The perimeter walk was where things got interesting. The moment they stepped outside Base Alpha's protective barriers, Gehenna 9 made its intentions clear. The air itself seemed hungry. The ground was treacherous, with patches that looked solid but gave way to pits lined with something that moved and glistened unpleasantly. Dravok's environmental suit was working overtime, its air scrubbers running constantly. Hellman's breathing rig fogged up regularly, forcing her to stop and clear it. Throck's exoskeleton made concerning noises. Liss's shield flickered more frequently. Mitchell looked around like someone checking out a new neighborhood. He'd unzipped his jacket because the air felt pleasantly cool, and he walked with the easy gait of someone taking a casual stroll. He'd unzipped his jacket because the air felt pleasantly cool, and he walked with the easy gait of someone taking a casual stroll. The flora here is particularly aggressive, Stavros explained, pointing to what looked like normal grass. Those are razor blades. Each strand can slice through military-grade armor. Neat. Mitchell knelt for a closer look. Like nature's version of a weed whacker. Don't touch it, 3 voices shouted simultaneously. Right, right. Mitchell stood, brushing off his knees. A sound like a steam engine crossed with a chainsaw echoed from nearby. Stavros immediately gestured for silence. Rift Hound. Nobody move. They hunt by motion and thermal signatures. Everyone froze. The sound grew closer, accompanied by something very large moving through vegetation that fought back. Mitchell stood perfectly still for about 30 seconds, then turned his head slightly to get a better look. I said don't move, Stavros hissed. Sorry, Mitchell whispered back. Never seen a rift hound before. Do they actually teleport, or is it more like camouflage? The question was answered when a creature the size of a small car materialized 20 feet away. It looked like someone had crossed a bear with living shadow and given it too many teeth. Its eyes glowed like hot coals, and when it opened its mouth, reality seemed to bend around its fangs. Mitchell's fellow trainees stopped breathing. Several pieces of equipment shut down rather than risk making noise. Wow, Mitchell said in what he thought was a whisper, but was actually audible to everyone. That's actually pretty cool. Does it hunt in packs? The rift hound turned its attention directly to Mitchell, tilted its massive head, and made a sound like a question mark carved from nightmares. Mitchell waved. 2 weeks into training, Colonel Stavros had developed a nervous tic and had started requisitioning additional psychiatric staff. The incident reports were stacking up. Day 5 had involved crossing the singing chasm, where the ground was riddled with gas pockets. that exploded randomly with enough force to launch personnel into orbit. Standard protocol required full bomb disposal gear, seismic detectors, and a minimum team of 20 specialists with emergency medical support on standby. Dravik's suit had needed 3 days of recalibration after the explosions kept triggering his emergency protocols. Helmin had suffered what a species considered a nervous breakdown. Throck's exoskeleton had been repaired 6 times. Liz had requested transfer to a different galaxy. Mitchell had packed a lunch. The trick is listening to the ground, he'd explained while others prepared equipment. Makes different sounds before it explodes, sort of like how ice cracks before it breaks, but with more sulfur. He'd walked across the chasm, eating a sandwich, pausing occasionally to change direction when the ground made what he described as grumpy noises. Behind him, the full expedition had followed his path exactly, their equipment useless compared to what Mitchell called paying attention. Day 9 had been the Thornwood, where the local plant life had evolved past photosynthesis into active predation. Trees moved their branches fast enough to impale passing creatures. The undergrowth was collectively hostile in ways that violated botany. Standard approach required flame units, cutting teams, and enough firepower to level a forest. What they got was Mitchell asking if anyone had a pocket knife. "Just want a piece from that one," he'd said, pointing to a tree actively trying to stab a passing bird. "Would look great in my apartment." When Hellman explained that the tree was trying to kill the bird, Mitchell had nodded thoughtfully and said his grandmother had rose bushes with similar attitudes, and you just had to be firm with them. He'd walked into the thornwood like he was visiting a park. The trees attacked him exactly once, received what could only be described as a very stern talking to, and had left him alone for the rest of the expedition. He'd emerged 3 hours later with plant cuttings, a pocket full of seeds, and a detailed map of safe paths through the forest. By day 12, the other trainees had started following Mitchell around like ducklings, not because they trusted his judgment, but because staying near him seemed to be the only way to avoid having the planet actively try to murder them. "I don't understand it," Hellman confided to her personal log. "Human Mitchell approaches every lethal scenario as if it were a minor inconvenience. Yesterday, when we encountered the electric serpents in the Screaming River, he asked if anyone had brought fishing line. The Screaming River had been the worst challenge yet. The water was home to creatures that looked like electric eels, but were the size of trains, and generated enough electricity to power a city. The current could sweep away a tank. The water was acidic enough to dissolve most metals, and the whole river screamed constantly, with the voices of everything that had ever died in it. Standard crossing required a portable bridge, full electrical insulation, and support teams with emergency medical facilities. The operation typically took 8 hours and had a 20% casualty rate. Mitchell had looked at the river for approximately 30 seconds, then started taking off his boots. "What are you doing?" Dravik had asked, his scales now permanently stuck on impending doom color. "Going for a swim. Water looks fine. Bit noisy, but I grew up near a highway. The water will dissolve you." "Nah, it's not that acidic. See how it's not eating through the rocks? Probably just mildly corrosive. Like swimming in a chlorinated pool, but with more screaming. The serpents will electrocute you. Only if I bother them. Electric eels back home are pretty chill if you don't go poking at them. These aren't normal electric eels." "Sure they are. Just bigger. Probably means they're older, so they'll be smarter about avoiding unnecessary conflict." Mitchell had waded into the water while his fellow trainees watched in horror. The massive serpents had surfaced to investigate, taken one look at him, and apparently decided he wasn't worth the effort. He'd swam across in a leisurely breaststroke, pausing midstream to wave and point out interesting fish. The return trip had been worse for everyone's nerves. Mitchell had convinced one of the giant serpents to give him a ride by offering it part of his energy bar. He'd arrived at the far shore, sitting on the back of a creature that could have powered half the galaxy, scratching it behind what might have been ears. "The screaming is just acoustics," he'd explained when he rejoined the group. "All that electrical activity creates vibrations, and the rock formations amplify them. Pretty interesting from an engineering perspective." By day 16, Stavros had started sending reports to Galactic Command that read less like military assessments and more like pleas for psychiatric intervention. Request immediate consultation with xenopsychology specialists, he'd written. Human subject continues to treat extreme hazard world environment as recreational opportunity. Yesterday observed subject attempting to befriend local apex predator. When questioned, subject stated he was making friends with the neighborhood. Recommend full psychological evaluation of entire human species. The evaluation arrived in the form of Dr. Amelia Brooks, a human psychiatrist hastily recruited from Earth's UN liaison office. She'd stepped off the transport, looked around Gehenna 9, and made the same comment that was becoming depressingly familiar. "Oh, good," she'd said, shouldering her pack. "It's not as bad as I expected." Stavros had stared at her, then updated his report. Require immediate extraction. All human personnel display identical pathological lack of self-preservation instincts. Recommend reclassification of human homeworld pending further investigation. But training continued because somewhere in the galaxy, the eternal swarm remained a threat, and the coalition needed soldiers who could function in impossible environments. What they were discovering was that they already had them. They just hadn't realized the humans they'd been dismissing as a minor species had evolved on a planet that made Gehenna 9 look like a vacation resort. Mitchell, completely unaware he was redefining galactic understanding of survival training, was sitting by a campfire he'd built from local materials, roasting something that looked like a cross between a fish and a lizard. "I heard there's a volcano about 80 clicks north," he mentioned to Dr. Brooks. "Want to check it out? Never seen an alien volcano before." Brooks, who'd spent the day cataloguing how Gehenna 9 could kill its inhabitants, looked up from her notes. "Is it active?" "Yeah, that's what makes it interesting." In the distance, a pack of rift hounds howled in harmony with what sounded like a plasma tornado. Mitchell looked up hopefully. "Oh, good. Sounds like the weather's getting interesting." Murder Gap earned its name through dedicated effort. Located in Gehenna 9's northern quadrant, it represented everything hostile about the planet concentrated into one convenient location. The rocks were carnivorous. The air was poisonous. The local ecosystem had evolved beyond predator-prey relationships into competitive homicide. "This is your final examination," Stavros announced to the assembled trainees. Both eyes and most of his left cheek were twitching now. 60 hours, minimal equipment, individual survival exercise. Complete this, you graduate. Equipment allowance was deliberately sparse. Basic shelter materials, 3 days of emergency rations, water purification device, and one personal item. Dravik had chosen a military-grade survival beacon. His scales had achieved a color that didn't exist in known spectrums and hurt to look at. Helmin had selected an emergency medical kit and was breathing so rapidly she was fogging her helmet. Throck's personal item was a portable weapons array, his antennae twitching independently. Liss had gone almost completely transparent, humming at a frequency that made equipment malfunction. Mitchell had brought a fishing rod. "Mitchell," Dr. Brooks said carefully, "are you certain that's your best choice?" "Well, briefing mentioned a stream. Figured I'd try local fishing." He checked his tackle box. "Plus, if water's clean enough for fish, it's probably safe to drink." Brooks made a note, but didn't look overly concerned. "The stream in Murder Gap isn't water," Stavros said. "It's liquid mercury mixed with dissolved uranium and what our scientists believe might be liquefied hostility." "Oh," Mitchell considered this. "Well, fishing rod's still useful. Good for reaching things you don't want to touch." The drop-off point overlooked Murder Gap, a vista that explained why the place had such a terrible reputation. The canyon walls were lined with stone formations that moved when nobody looked directly at them. The bottom was shrouded in mist that periodically screamed. The sky above was a different color than everywhere else, suggesting local atmospheric conditions had abandoned physics. "Individual drops will be made at random locations," Stavros explained. "Your objective is simple: survive until pickup. Do not attempt contact with each other. Do not attempt to leave canyon boundaries. Do not attempt to feed or domesticate local wildlife." The last instruction was delivered while looking directly at Mitchell, who seemed disappointed. Dravik went first, his suit already running diagnostics suggesting imminent failure. His pod disappeared into the mist with a sound like screaming metal. Helmin followed, her breathing rig working overtime. Her pod vanished with what might have been a whimper. Throck's descent was accompanied by his weapons array charging. His pod hit with a thud that echoed off carnivorous rocks. Liss's pod simply faded from view, her crystalline form trying to phase out of existence. Last drop, Stavros announced, not looking at Mitchell. Any final questions? Yeah. Mitchell settled into his pod with his fishing rod. What's the local time? Want to make sure I'm up early enough for sunrise. His pod door sealed with a hiss that sounded distinctly like a sigh. Murder Gap was everything its reputation suggested, and several things it didn't. The moment Mitchell's pod touched down, the environment began what could only be described as an aggressive welcome. The ground beneath his feet pulsed with a heartbeat. The air tasted like copper and existential dread. Something that might have been wind carried sounds, suggesting the canyon was having a conversation with itself in a language made entirely of threats. Mitchell looked around. Not exactly what he'd expected, but it had character. First order was shelter. The pod was designed as temporary housing, but the local rocks were already eyeing it with appetite. Better to establish something more permanent before things got weird. He found a spot near what the briefing had optimistically called a stream. The liquid was mercury-based, but it was flowing, which meant it followed some natural course. In Mitchell's experience, water sources were usually associated with other useful things, even if the water itself wasn't immediately drinkable. The fishing rod proved immediately useful, not for fishing, but for testing things before touching them. The local rocks were carnivorous but slow and appeared to have poor eyesight. As long as he moved predictably and didn't act like prey, they ignored him. Setting up camp took about an hour. Mitchell had learned shelter building in environments ranging from Arctic tundra to desert sand. Murder Gap was just another variation. The key was working with the environment rather than against it. The carnivorous rocks made excellent perimeter security. Anything trying to sneak up would have to get past them first, and they were territorial enough to attack other predators. The screaming mist provided excellent camouflage and background noise. The gravitational anomalies could be used for water collection if you positioned containers correctly. By sunset, Mitchell had a functioning camp, reliable filtered water, and basic understanding of local predator patterns. He'd also discovered that liquefied hostility made excellent insect repellent in small quantities. Meanwhile, his fellow trainees were discovering Murder Gap had earned its reputation. Dravik's suit had suffered complete breakdown within 6 hours. His beacon was functioning, but the canyon's electromagnetic field scrambled his signal into what sounded like a distress call sung in three-part harmony by dying robots. He'd barricaded himself in his pod, rationing emergency air, while hallucinating conversations with childhood imaginary friends. Helmin's breathing rig had clogged with something that might have been pollen, but moved like it had opinions. She was experiencing complete psychological breakdown, compounded by her medical training, trying to diagnose her own symptoms, while her survival instincts suggested running away might be best. Throck had engaged his weapons array against multiple hostile contacts, only to discover he was fighting his own shadow as interpreted by the canyon's unusual lighting. His exoskeleton was running low on power, ammunition depleted, and he was beginning to suspect the canyon was personally offended by his presence. Liss had achieved complete transparency, communicating only in frequencies that caused mild headaches. Her tactical analysis had overloaded when presented with an environment where cause and effect were optional. Mitchell, unaware his fellow trainees were experiencing survival-induced madness, was enjoying the most peaceful evening he'd had since arriving on Gehenna 9. Local wildlife was unusual, but followed predictable patterns once you figured out the rules. The canyon's acoustics were actually pleasant once you got used to them, creating a natural sound system that was almost musical. He'd caught something for dinner using his fishing rod and emergency rations as bait. The creature looked like a cross between a trout and a small dragon, but tasted like chicken, and had no interest in eating him back. As night fell, Mitchell sat by his impossible campfire, writing in the journal he'd brought. Day 1 entry read, "Interesting local geology. Fishing is good. Should have brought marshmallows." Somewhere in darkness, something howled with the voice of crystallized despair. Mitchell looked up hopefully, wondering if it might be friendly. The emergency extraction call came at 0200 hours, 39 hours into what was supposed to be a 60-hour exercise. Stavros received it while staring at biometric readouts, suggesting his trainees were either dead, insane, or had transcended normal biological existence. Dravok's vital signs showed stress patterns exceeding his species' known limits. Heart rate achieved frequencies associated with hummingbirds. Brain activity suggested either enlightenment or complete psychological break, possibly both. Hellman's readings indicated she'd stopped breathing in recognizable patterns, instead producing aquatic sobbing sounds. Stress hormones at levels that should have been lethal. Body temperature fluctuating between hypothermia and fever. Throk's exoskeleton transmitted error messages in 20 different languages, including 4 his species had never encountered. Biological signs suggested he was fighting a war against an enemy existing entirely in his mind, and losing badly. Liz had stopped registering on most sensors. The few readings they got suggested she'd achieved quantum state, allowing her to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, none entirely in the same reality. Then there was Mitchell. His biometric readings showed he was asleep. Not just asleep, but sleeping deeply and peacefully. Vital signs suggested he was more relaxed than at any point since arriving on Gehenna 9. Stress hormones at baseline. Heart rate consistent with someone taking a pleasant nap. Brain activity indicating he was probably dreaming about something enjoyable. "Sir," the medical technician said, checking instruments for the 3rd time. "I think there's an error in the human's monitoring equipment." "What kind of error?" Stavros asked, though he suspected the error was in their understanding of humans rather than equipment. According to these readings, human Mitchell's stress levels have been decreasing steadily since the exercise began. Body temperature is stable, breathing regular, and brain chemistry suggests he's having fun. The extraction team found Dravok curled in his pod, having constructed what appeared to be a religious shrine to his suit's air system. He spoke in tongues and had covered walls with mathematical equations that might have been profound insights or elaborate doodles. Hellman was attempting surgery on a rock formation she'd convinced herself was a patient, treating it for conditions that didn't exist while hiding from her own medical equipment. Throk was engaged in hand-to-hand combat with a shadow that moved independently of any light source, performing victory dances between combat rounds. Liz was found in a state that could only be described as aggressively not present, visible but existing in constant state of about to disappear, communicating through color changes that induced mild seizures. Mitchell was sitting by a campfire that shouldn't have been possible, cooking breakfast and watching the sun rise. His camp was organized, clean, and appeared to operate under different physical laws than the rest of Murder Gap. Carnivorous rocks in his immediate vicinity had arranged themselves into what looked like garden decorations. "Morning," he said cheerfully as the extraction team approached. "Perfect timing. Just made coffee. Anyone want some?" The extraction team, wearing full hazmat suits and carrying enough firepower to level a building, stared. "Sir," the team leader said carefully, "are you aware you've been alone in Murder Gap for 39 hours? Yeah, it's been great. Really peaceful once you understand the local customs. Did you know the screaming mist is just thermal vents? Makes sounds like wind chimes if you listen right. Sir, this environment is classified as lethally hostile to all known life forms. Well, sure, if you fight it. But most places are dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. This is just more honest about it." The psychological evaluation that followed was conducted by Dr. Brooks, 3 xenopsychology specialists, a combat stress expert, and someone whose title was theoretical survival consultant. Mitchell sat in the interview room drinking coffee, answering questions like someone discussing a pleasant vacation. "Mitchell, can you describe your experience in Murder Gap?" Brooks began. "Sure. Good fishing, interesting wildlife, excellent acoustics. Gravitational anomalies took getting used to, but once you figure out the pattern, they're useful. And the sunrise was beautiful. Don't see colors like that back home. Were you ever afraid? Mitchell considered seriously. Well, yeah. First night I worried I'd set up camp too close to the stream. Mercury content makes soil unstable. Didn't want to wake up in a sinkhole. What about the hostile environment? Carnivorous rocks, screaming mist. What about them? Didn't they seem dangerous? Everything's dangerous if you don't pay attention. Cars are dangerous, but people drive every day. Oceans are dangerous, but people swim. This place is just more upfront about risks. The xenopsychology specialist, a crystalline being from Arcturus, made a sound like breaking glass. Human Mitchell, can you describe your homeworld's environmental conditions? Earth. Pretty standard. Deserts, mountains, oceans, forests, weather patterns, seasonal changes, the usual. What about dangerous wildlife? Oh, sure. Bears, wolves, big cats, sharks, poisonous snakes, spiders, jellyfish. Australia's got some interesting stuff. Box jellyfish, blue-ringed octopus, funnel-web spiders. Then there's microscopic things like bacteria and viruses that can kill you without you knowing they're there. The specialist's crystalline structure was cracking, and humans consider this normal. Well, yeah, you learn to avoid dangerous stuff when you can, but it's all part of the ecosystem. Most won't bother you if you don't bother it. What about natural disasters? Earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, wildfires, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis. Standard geological activity. Oh, and avalanches in mountains, flash floods, and blizzards up north. The room fell silent, except for several people updating psychological files. The combat stress expert was making notes that included the word impossible underlined multiple times. Mitchell, Brooks said finally, do you understand the Coalition classifies Gehenna 9 as a Class 12 hazard world? Yeah, that seems right. Definitely more challenging than most places. And you find it pleasant? Well, sure. Good exercise, interesting scenery, new experiences, plus it's quiet. No traffic, no crowds, no pollution. Just you and nature. Mitchell, the theoretical survival consultant, interrupted. What classification would you give your homeworld using the same scale? Mitchell thought seriously. Don't know exact criteria, but probably around class 15. Maybe higher if you count really dangerous places like deep ocean or active volcano zones. Oh, and space around Earth is pretty hostile without proper equipment. The silence that followed was the kind usually preceding either applause or existential crisis. Definitely the latter. Excuse me, the xenopsychology specialist said, standing abruptly. I need to make a call. The call went to Coalition Command, then Strategic Assessment, then Xenobiology, then Philosophy, then a department titled Things That Shouldn't Be Possible But Apparently Are. By day's end, Mitchell's psychological evaluation had been classified as a galactic security document, and Earth had been quietly moved to a list of planets the galaxy preferred to think of as theoretical rather than actual. Meanwhile, Mitchell finished his coffee and asked if anyone wanted to see photos he'd taken of local wildlife. The official suspension of the Coalition training program came with a memo simultaneously classified top secret and filed under educational disasters. Stavros's final report ran 300 pages and included 20 different requests for psychiatric leave, early retirement, and reassignment to any location where the environment operated according to recognizable physical laws. The suspension memo was brief. Due to unforeseen complications involving incompatible species psychology, the Gehenna 9 training program is hereby terminated pending comprehensive review of participant selection criteria and environmental safety protocols. What it didn't mention was that half the participants were in intensive therapy. The coalition's cafeteria was quiet except for the hum of air recyclers and the occasional clink of utensils. Mitchell sat alone at a corner table, working through what passed for a sandwich while reviewing datapads that detailed something called the Eternal Swarm. Dr. Brooks slid into the seat across from him, carrying her own tray and a datapad that practically vibrated with bureaucratic anxiety. The results are in, she said without preamble. Earth has been reclassified. Mitchell looked up from his sandwich. What's it classified as now? Class 18, hazard world. The scale only went up to 15 before yesterday. They had to create a new category. That seems excessive. Dr. Brooks was practically laughing. Mitchell, according to their assessment, Earth's environmental conditions include atmospheric electrical activity that strikes the surface approximately 100 times per second, predatory megafauna that hunt in coordinated groups, microscopic organisms that adapt to almost any countermeasure, and weather patterns that regularly produce localized apocalyptic events. You mean lightning, pack hunters, bacteria, and storms? There's more, she continued. They also discovered from the geological survey, Earth's surface is constantly shifting due to tectonic activity, experiences regular volcanic eruptions, and is periodically bombarded by space objects large enough to cause mass extinction events. Well, sure. That's how planets work. You need geological activity for mountains and soil renewal. Volcanoes are just recycling, and asteroid impacts are pretty rare, only every few million years. Oh, I understand this, but Mitchell, most inhabited worlds are specifically chosen because they don't have those characteristics. That seems boring. Brooks showed him her datapad, displaying a comparative analysis of planetary habitability. Earth appeared as a small red dot in a section labeled Theoretical Upper Limits of Survivable Conditions. According to this analysis, she explained, Earth shouldn't support complex life at all. The fact it not only supports life, but produced a species that considers its conditions normal is causing significant revisions to galactic theories about evolution and adaptation. Through the cafeteria window, they could see medical transports loading. Dravik was stable, but kept insisting his suit had achieved consciousness. Hellman walked under supervision after attempting emergency surgery on a lunch tray. Throck had recovered enough to argue with staff, though his arguments consisted mainly of tactical assessments for defeating furniture. Liss was visible again, but existed in constant mild panic, as if expecting reality to stop working. What happens now? Mitchell asked. Officially, the training program is suspended indefinitely. Unofficially, there are very interesting conversations happening at highest levels of galactic government. What kind of conversations? The kind where they discuss whether humanity should be classified as potential threat or potential ally, and whether there's actually a difference. Mitchell considered this while finishing his sandwich. Are we in trouble? No, actually, we're being offered a treaty. What kind? The kind where Earth becomes full coalition member with all benefits and protections. In exchange, humanity agrees to help with the eternal swarm problem. What's the eternal swarm? Brooks pulled up another file. The image showed something resembling a space jellyfish crossed with a geometric nightmare, surrounded by what appeared to be remains of several star systems. There are hostile species that consumes entire solar systems. They've been expanding across the galaxy for 1,000 years. Conventional military tactics have been largely ineffective. The coalition has been looking for new approaches, and they think humans might be helpful. She leaned forward. Mitchell, they just watched you treat an extreme survival exercise as an enjoyable camping trip. The eternal swarm might be dangerous, but they're probably not more dangerous than Earth's weather patterns. Good point. When do we start? There's going to be a formal diplomatic process first. Ambassadors, treaties, cultural exchanges. That sounds complicated. It is, but there's also been a request for an informal consultation first. They want to know if you'd be willing to look at tactical data about the eternal swarm and give your opinion on possible strategies. Mitchell wiped his hands on his napkin and stood. Sure, I can take a look. Do they have coffee where we're going? I'm sure they can arrange something. Coalition headquarters occupied a space station the size of a small moon, orbiting a binary star system that provided constant, beautiful light. The Strategic Operations Center looked like someone had crossed a war room with an art gallery. All clean lines, holographic displays, and beings from a dozen different species moving with purpose. Admiral Corsath, a drachma whose scales were permanently grey with stress, greeted them personally. His compound eyes tracked Mitchell with the wariness of someone who'd read the reports and wasn't sure he believed them. Human Mitchell, he said, his vocalizer rendering perfect English with only slight metallic undertones. Thank you for coming. We understand you're here for consultation regarding the eternal swarm threat. Happy to help, Mitchell said, looking around with interest. This is a nice facility. Good lighting. Corsath's scales rippled. Confusion, maybe. Yes, well, let me brief you on the situation. The holographic display activated, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red zones spread across it like infection, each marking systems consumed by the eternal swarm. They appeared approximately 1,000 years ago, Corsath began. Initial contact was catastrophic. They consume everything, planets, stations, ships. They're composed of billions of individual organisms that function as a collective intelligence. They adapt rapidly to any weapon we deploy. They can survive in hard vacuum, extreme temperatures, and high radiation. They reproduce exponentially. Mitchell studied the display. How fast do they move? Their swarm ships can achieve zero point 0.8 light speed. They don't use conventional drives, some kind of organic propulsion we don't fully understand. And you said they adapt to weapons. Yes, energy weapons become ineffective after initial deployment. Kinetic weapons work briefly before they develop countermeasures. We've tried biological agents, nuclear weapons, antimatter. Nothing provides lasting results. Mitchell walked around the display, examining different angles. What about their supply chain? Corsath's scales shifted to confused purple. Supply chain? Yeah, they consume planets, right? So they need to process all that material somehow. Where do they do that? How long does it take? What's their vulnerable period? The room fell silent. Several strategists were suddenly very busy with their datapads. We haven't, Corsath started. That is, we've focused primarily on direct combat approaches. Right, but that's not really working, is it? Mitchell pointed at one of the red zones. How long did it take them to consume this system? Approximately 3 months. And this one? 2 months. They're getting faster, so either they're getting better at it or they're getting hungrier or both. Mitchell zoomed the display to show a cluster of red zones. These are all close together. They hit them in sequence. Yes, so they're not just randomly consuming, they're following some kind of pattern, probably moving from high-resource systems to high-resource systems, building up strength. He turned to Corsath. Have you tried starving them? What do you mean, starving them? They need to eat, right? What if you evacuated a system in their path, stripped it of anything useful, and let them arrive at an empty table? Would they waste time processing nothing, or would they move on? More frantic datapad activity. We haven't attempted that strategy, Corsath admitted. Evacuating entire systems would be logistically challenging. Sure, but probably less challenging than fighting an enemy that adapts to everything you throw at it. Mitchell examined the display more closely. What about their communication? Billion individual organisms functioning as collective intelligence, they have to coordinate somehow. We believe they use some form of quantum entanglement for instantaneous communication across the swarm. Can you disrupt it? We've tried. The communication network is redundant and self-healing. So hit multiple points simultaneously. Make them choose what to heal first. Mitchell gestured at the display. You've been treating this like a military problem, but it's really a logistics problem. They're not an army, they're a system. Disrupt the system. Admiral Corsath's scales cycled through several colors. Human Mitchell, are you suggesting we approach the eternal swarm the way we would approach supply chain management? I'm suggesting you stop trying to fight them head-on and start making their existence inconvenient. Mitchell pointed to another cluster of systems. Back home, we had problems with invasive species. Giant snakes in the Everglades, cane toads in Australia, Asian carp in the Mississippi. You can't kill them all. There's too many, and they reproduce too fast. But you can make the environment less hospitable, change their food supply, disrupt their breeding, introduce competition. You're proposing we introduce a competing species to fight the eternal swarm. I'm proposing you stop thinking about direct combat and start thinking about ecology. They're organisms, right? They have needs, vulnerabilities, life cycle requirements. Find those and exploit them. The Strategic Operations Center had gone completely silent. Every being present was staring at Mitchell like he'd just suggested the sun might be hot. A crystalline accord strategist, similar species to Liss, but apparently more stable, chimed forward. Human Mitchell, your proposals would require complete restructuring of our strategic doctrine. Yeah, probably, but your current doctrine isn't working. The strategist's crystalline form dimmed thoughtfully. No, it is not. Then try something different, Mitchell shrugged. Worst case, it doesn't work and you're back where you started. Best case, you figure out how to make the galaxy's biggest pest problem into just a manageable nuisance. Admiral Corsath was making notes on his datapad with increasing speed. Human Mitchell, would you be willing to work with our strategic planning division? Your perspective is unprecedented. Sure, I can stick around for a while, but I'm going to need more coffee and maybe some proper Earth food. No offense, but that sandwich earlier tasted like cardboard. We can arrange that, Corsath said quickly. 3 weeks later, Mitchell found himself in what the Coalition was calling the Alternative Strategic Approaches Initiative. Basically a think tank where he'd been paired with the galaxy's brightest minds to completely rethink how to deal with the eternal swarm. The breakthrough came during what was supposed to be a routine analysis session. Wait, Mitchell said, staring at biological data scrolling across a screen. Go back. That bit there. The crystalline accord strategist Dr. Vess manipulated the holographic display. This section details their cellular metabolism. Right, and they need specific elements for reproduction. Heavy metals, rare earths, some exotic materials. Mitchell leaned forward. What if you seeded systems in their path with decoy materials? Stuff that looks like what they need but isn't quite right. Like fool's gold instead of real gold. Vess's crystalline structure began glowing brighter. If they consumed materials that approximated nutritional requirements but were molecularly incompatible, it would slow their reproduction rate without triggering their adaptation response because it wouldn't register as an attack. Exactly. And while they're processing bad food, you evacuate actual valuable systems and set up proper defenses. Dr. Hellman, who'd recovered from her murder gap experience and requested transfer to the project, made excited chirping sounds through her vocalizer. We could also introduce engineered microorganisms into their feeding zones. Not weapons, but organisms that would compete for the same resources. Force them to expend energy on ecological competition rather than expansion. Now you're thinking, Mitchell said. Make their whole existence more difficult without directly fighting them. The strategy that emerged over the following weeks was revolutionary by coalition standards, but common sense by Earth. Instead of trying to destroy the eternal swarm, they'd make the galaxy progressively less hospitable to its expansion. Decoy systems seeded with incompatible materials. Engineered organisms that competed for resources. Strategic evacuation, creating dead zones that cost the swarm energy to cross. Disruption of their communication networks at multiple simultaneous points. It was ecological warfare, and the coalition had never considered it because their entire strategic doctrine was built around direct military engagement. Admiral Corsath presented the strategy to Coalition Command with Mitchell standing beside him. The assembled admirals, generals, and strategic advisors listened with expressions ranging from skepticism to hope. This is highly unconventional, one admiral finally said, a being that resembled a floating jellyfish surrounded by defensive tentacles. Yes, Corsath agreed. It's also the first strategy proposed in 200 years that doesn't involve directly confronting an enemy we cannot defeat in direct confrontation. The human proposes we don't fight them at all. The human proposes we fight them intelligently, Corsath corrected, using methods that exploit their biological imperatives rather than their tactical adaptations. And if it fails, Mitchell spoke up, then you're back to current strategy, which is already failing. But if it works, you turn the biggest threat the galaxy's ever seen into a manageable pest control problem. The vote to approve the strategy was unanimous, though several admirals looked like they weren't sure whether they were making history or committing strategic suicide. Implementation took 6 months. The coalition mobilized resources on a scale not seen since the founding wars. Entire systems were evacuated and seeded with decoy materials. Bioengineering teams worked around the clock, creating competitive organisms. Specialized task forces trained in simultaneous communication disruption. Mitchell was everywhere, consulting on deployment strategies, troubleshooting problems, and occasionally reminding people that they were overthinking things. It doesn't have to be perfect, he told a stressed Drachma engineer who was worried about decoy material specifications. It just has to be close enough that they waste time trying to eat it. The first test came when the Eternal Swarm encountered a seeded system in the outer reaches. Coalition observers watched from a safe distance as the swarm descended on what appeared to be a mineral-rich planet. They consumed it in their typical fashion, billions of organisms stripping the surface clean over the course of weeks. Then something unprecedented happened. They stopped. For 3 weeks, the swarm remained in the system, not moving forward, not expanding. Biological sensors detected increased metabolic activity. They were trying to process materials that looked right but weren't. "It's working," Vess said, her crystalline form glowing bright enough to hurt. "They're spending energy trying to derive nutrition from incompatible materials." "How long will it delay them?" Korseth asked. "Unknown, but it's already longer than any previous engagement." The second test came when engineered organisms were introduced into a system ahead of the swarm's projected path. The organisms were designed to consume the same resources the swarm needed, but reproduce faster and more efficiently in the pre-swarm environment. When the swarm arrived, they encountered an ecosystem already picked clean of easily accessible materials. Again, they stopped, this time for 5 weeks. They're having to expend additional energy to both combat the competing organisms and extract resources, Hellman reported. Their reproduction rate in that system is down 63% from projected norms. The third test was communication disruption. Coalition forces hit 17 different swarm clusters simultaneously, targeting their quantum communication nodes with coordinated strikes. The swarm's response was chaos. Without instant coordination, different clusters began operating on local information only. Some continued on previous trajectories. Others stopped to establish new communication networks. A few even began moving in contradictory directions. "They're confused," Mitchell observed, watching the tactical display. "They've never had to operate without perfect coordination before. They don't know how to handle it." Admiral Korseth's scales had achieved a color that Mitchell had learned meant cautiously optimistic. "Human Mitchell, your strategy appears to be working." "It's not just my strategy anymore," Mitchell said. "You guys ran with it and made it work. I just pointed out that fighting smart is better than fighting hard. Nevertheless, the Galactic Defense Coalition owes humanity a debt. Nah, we're all in this together now. That's what the treaty says." Korseth's scales shifted to something that might have been the drachma equivalent of a smile. "Indeed it does." The formal signing of Earth's coalition membership treaty took place 6 months after Mitchell's consultation began. The ceremony was held on coalition headquarters, with representatives from every member species present. Mitchell attended in his dress uniform, which he'd had to borrow because he'd never actually needed one before. Dr. Brooks stood beside him, looking equally uncomfortable in formal diplomatic attire. "Never thought I'd end up here," Mitchell muttered as they waited for the ceremony to begin. "Never thought humanity would be accepted into galactic society by treating a survival exercise like a camping trip," Brooks replied. "Fair point." The signing itself was anticlimactic. Lots of speeches in various languages, translation devices working overtime, and formal documents being exchanged. But the meaning was clear. Earth was no longer an isolated backwater. Humanity was now a full member of galactic civilization. More importantly, Earth's military forces were being integrated into coalition strategic planning. Not as soldiers. The galaxy had plenty of those, but as strategic consultants, bringing human perspectives on problems the galaxy had been solving the same way for too long. After the ceremony, Mitchell found himself surrounded by beings from a dozen different species, all wanting to talk to the human who'd revolutionized coalition strategy. "Human Mitchell," one asked, a floating being that communicated through color patterns. Is it true that Earth's dominant predator is afraid of small electronic cleaning devices? You mean cats and robot vacuums? Yeah, that's pretty common. The being's colors shifted to what was probably disbelief. Your apex predators are defeated by cleaning equipment. They're not defeated, they're just startled. There's a difference. More questions followed. Mitchell answered them patiently, watching as the galaxy's various species slowly began to understand that humanity's apparent recklessness wasn't insanity. It was simply the result of evolving on a planet that made everywhere else look safe by comparison. Later, he found Admiral Corsath standing by an observation window, looking out at the stars. Beautiful, isn't it? Mitchell said, joining him. Indeed. Corsath's scales were a peaceful blue. I must confess, when I first read your reports, I thought there had been some catastrophic error in our evaluation protocols. What changed your mind? I realized that there wasn't an error in our evaluation of you. There was an error in our understanding of what survival meant. Corsath turned to face him. We've spent so long trying to make warfare safe that we forgot sometimes the best strategy is simply to be too stubborn to die. Mitchell laughed. That's basically Earth's survival strategy in a nutshell. Yes, and now it's the galaxy's strategy as well. Corsath extended a clawed hand. Thank you, Ryan Mitchell, for showing us that there are other ways to fight. Mitchell shook his claw, just happy to help. And hey, if you ever need someone to test another survival course, let me know. Gehenna 9 was interesting, but I bet there are other places worth checking out. Corsath's scales went pale. I will make a note of that. Through the observation window, Earth hung in the distance, a small blue marble that had just changed the galaxy's strategic doctrine forever. Mitchell smiled. It had been an interesting deployment after all, and if the galaxy needed humanity's help with other problems, well, humans had always been good at solving problems that everyone else thought were impossible. Sometimes all it took was approaching the problem like it was just another Tuesday back home. The galaxy was still learning that for humans, impossible was just another word for hasn't been tried yet. And in the end, that made all the difference.